Yeah,
Yeah,
okay. Okay.
yeah.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Yeah, good morning, Dr. Rene Kwakkel. Good night, yeah, in Canada. Yeah.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to thanks to Dr. Rene Kwakkel. Yeah, my student, I want to introduce you to Dr. Rene Kwakkel. Yeah, one of the senior lecturer in Wageningen University. Yeah, he have a specialty in poultry nutrition. Yeah, so me and my student, yeah, are very happy now, Dr. Rene Kwakkel. Yeah, we got the opportunity to the chance to have a guest lecture. Yeah, I can learn from you. Yeah, right now. Okay. Welcome also some of the lecturer from Brawijaya University, Dr. Siti Azizah, yeah, Dr. Heli, maybe he also joined with us. Okay, this program is the 3-in-1 program. Yeah, as I informed to you before. Yeah, this is the course that taught by 3 parties. Yeah, UB lecturer, industrial practitioner, and foreign lecturer. Yeah, Dr. Rene. Yeah, last month we have a guest lecture also from the practitioner from the New Hope industry. This is a feed mill company. Yeah. So my student is already here from the practitioner about the formulation, feed formulation or feeding technology. Yeah. Okay. Today we have 2 topics. Yeah, for the guest lecture. Yeah, actually we want to split it, but now, yeah, today we will have 2 topics. Yeah, about the pullet nutrient requirement for the first topic, and the second topic is about the cost and liquid feed. Yeah, I think we have 2.5 hours. Yeah, so I think we'll be split, yeah, for 2 topics. So the first topic will be delivered with Dr. Rene for 1 hour, and then we have a discussion for 15 minutes for the topic 1, and then maybe we have a small break, 5 minutes, for toilet or for drink. Yeah, and then we continue for the second topics. Yeah, also we have a same time. Yeah, 1 hour for presentation and also 15 minutes for discussion. Yeah. Okay, we have already 39 students here, Dr. Rene. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe the time and it's yours. Yeah. Now can start.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Irfan. It's very nice to be here on the show. Somebody from the Netherlands. I'm coming from Wageningen University, and now I'm in Canada, and I'm now talking to students and lecturers in Indonesia. So that is quite a nice triangle, so to say. What I will do is, I think the idea, the layout for tonight is dramatically nice. So let's try to cover my talks in 1 hour, or maybe a little bit less. I do not know. I have no idea. And then we will have a discussion, because I also like to interact with the students, particularly. So whenever you have a question, then please speak it out, because I like to not to read it, but let's say to hear your question. That would be very nice. Well, what I'm going to do first is I'm talking about the layer pullet. I'm doing quite a lot in rearing hens. Currently, it has again more interest also from the feed mill industry. There was a long time, about 20 years, that the feed mill industry was only interested in broilers and broiler breeders, but nowadays you see slowly that also the layer, and particular also the rearing period, the layer is coming into focus again, and that is quite nice. I think a couple of my PhD students are working in that area. I'll as I said here, I'll just start with some general thoughts, and I think that is good to. I hope that it will work, that it's going. Yeah, it's going. So if you see the current approach in feeding strategies is that we are slowly moving.
Iya, jam 9.
Can everybody hear me? Probably. Okay. That we are slowly moving from table values to, let's say, animal models, and most of them are metabolic models, so to say. And that means that we always have to look to the interaction between the bird on the one hand and the diet on the other. And most of the time, one of the biggest sayings in animal nutrition is always that the feed intake is basically driving the performance of the bird, whether it is growth or egg production, it doesn't matter. Whenever the bird is a good eater, then you will most of the time see that they will also perform, which is basically in Indonesia could be an issue, because there we have the situation of heat stress, and that is detrimental for feed intake. Well, whenever we are talking about layers, then those are producing a lot of eggs, particularly if you go in the direction of 100 weeks of production, like we do here in Western Europe, so to say. And that means that you need to find out how should we prepare those birds for this long time of production. And on the other hand, we need to be aware that the feed ingredients that we are feeding should be adapted to the gastrointestinal tract and to the evolution of the gastrointestinal tract. So let's see what it means. Well, we basically live by variation, and we think always that the bird in the barn, they are more similar to each other, but there are dramatic large differences between the birds. And I can particularly illustrate that by these figures, because this is these are two figures from the precision feeding stations for my host here in Canada, Martin Zuidhof, and he is using so-called precision feeding stations where he is feeding birds individually, not because that is directly applicable to the practice, but it is a very nice tool to investigate what birds are doing. And what you see here in those two graphs is that the number of visits to those feeding stations is constantly varying between the birds, but also the daily feed intake, but that is dramatically different between individual birds. You see that on the blue bar graph that you see over there. So there is a difference in feed intake behavior, a difference in digestive capacity, and also in the metabolic capacity. And there's a lot of unexplained variation in that way, not only by activity, for example, in an outdoor ranging system, but also by plumage condition, and due to feather packing potentially. I will tell a little bit later about what all type of other issues you might have as well with layers in that idea. So we're talking about customized of precision feeding, as we call that. Well, birds have a nutrient-specific appetite, so to say. And what I like a lot is so-called choice feeding experiments, because in a choice feeding experiment you could see quite easily, and we're thinking now again about a choice feeding experiment here in Canada with calcium and phosphor and different ingredients milled in a different way, so feeding it as a very coarse diet, or as a pellet, which is in fact a very fine diet, and I will tell you about that in the next presentation. But the cafetaria, the foraging behavior cafetaria system, so let's say the choice feeding, is not natural for the bird, as you know that they are only scavenging throughout what they can try and find. And most of the time there have been some trials in the past in Denmark, and we saw that birds were quite capable in getting a quite nice layer diet that they took in. One of the newer technologies, or you could better say one of the newer statistical methodologies, is from Raubenheimer, a German person who invented the nutritional geometry, where he tries to see if birds are having a choice between, for example, an energy or a protein-rich diet. Then you could put and see where the constraints are and what the metabolic choices are made by the bird and what type of interactions they are taking, because they try to avoid a lot of energy losses, of course, if a bird is eating in that way. So the nutritional geometry is a good one in that way. There's another one which is quite nice, and that's what I got to know from one of the researchers from Australia, Eugenie Roura, and he told me a couple of years ago in a conference in Spain, that if you take, normally we would say a chicken, sorry for the fact that some of the words, as I see now, are still in Dutch, and I should have translated them as well. So mens is human, kip is skip, chicken, but you probably know that. If you say in absolute taste buds in the oral cavity, then the human have far more taste buds than a chicken. But what he did is he related that to the unit of volume in this oral cavity, and he said, "Hey, wait a minute! If you take it just as per square centimeters within the beak or within the mouth of humans and chickens, then they more or less have the same type of oral sensing in that way, which is also quite logic, because if a bird is pecking on the ground, then they should sense directly whether this is a good stuff or not toxic or whatever. So they should have basically a good oral sensing. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many birds around. Well, to give you an idea about if you're talking about gut sensing, everybody, the same with birds, everybody has his own gut feeling, and I just write down here my own gut feeling. What I normally do is taking some cereals and yogurt in the morning, and that is my breakfast, and that gives me a perfect gut feeling. Probiotics basically, and some fibrous materials. Then I'm coming to the pullets. To the pullets and basically to the laying hens as such. As you can see here, that in the last many decades, I think about 25 years, only 15% of all the papers in poultry science were dedicated to pullets and layers. The rest was all either broilers or broiler breeders. So you saw that there is only few data available in the literature, and that's a pity. And one of the last persons that were doing a larger research on the pullet, on the young layer, that I did it myself in halfway the 1990s, so to say. But it is a very important life cycle, as you can see here, because we are talking about birds that are being hatched, going to the rearing farm. There are a lot of vaccinations coming there, about 12 different vaccinations in the whole lifespan up to 18 weeks of age. We are very eager on feed intake capacity, because feed intake capacity of the bird is going down a little bit at the end of the rearing period. So we want to have the birds on a higher feed intake at that time, but that's not always happening, although there's changing a lot in the body of the bird, so to say. There might be dietary changes in terms of form, in terms of ingredients or nutrients, and we do not know a lot about that up to now. But we need to be aware that from 15 weeks of age, the body is in such a way transforming from a pre-pubertal bird to a pubertal bird. So the ovary is developing, the oviduct is dramatically developing at that time. So that needs a lot of protein at that time. And then the transition to the layer house is coming. Uniformity, so let's say all the birds starting more or less at the same time to produce their first egg, is a big thing for any farmer, because then they know that, okay, there are not half of my flock is still growing and the other half is already producing an egg. So I do want to give them a diet that is perfectly balanced for the production goal that they have at that moment, which is transforming them from growing to egg laying, egg production. Well, here you see what is all happening in this on this little time span. We have about 20 vaccinations in at 8 or 9 moments. And the funny thing is that you see that countries where the population of layers is less dense than in the Netherlands, they only have 3 vaccinations. You see that in this box that I put down here underneath the timeline. In the Nordic countries like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, they only have 3 vaccinations because the farms are quite far away from each other and they can cope with it. And every vaccination means that the bird has a little decrease in feed intake and need to catch it up. And with the different accolades, you see here that you have an early start of the bird, you have a basic body development. I will tell a little bit later, more about that a little bit later. You should be aware of the feed intake behavior, and then they have to prepare for laying. So the lifespan is quite a dense one for a young premature layer, so to say. Let's start with this one, and I will give a little bit more information about it in the next presentation. But I found once 2 very nice statements, or you could say propositions. The one was from Rosalie, 2015, and the other one was for Ribeiro, 2005. And if you take into account that humans from conception to maturity have a longer chronological age than chickens, so to say, from conception to maturity, and if you read then that adequate nutrition during the first 1,000 days post-conception is one of the fundamental prerequisites for survival, growth, optimal development, and lifelong health in humans. And if you put that sentence to young chickens, then you could say the most important management impact on performance of the baby chick is to ensure that it consumes enough food and water during the first couple of weeks, because then we are talking about weeks instead of about 1,000 days, which means about 3 years, so to say. So it means that those first weeks are dramatically important for a young bird. And if you make mistakes there, then potentially you will never catch up again with your flock. Because the maturation of the thermoregulatory system is there, maturation of the immune system, and the maturation of the gastrointestinal tract. And the latter one we are most focused on, of course, in our research. Well, this is a very old model, so to say. This was my own model in the early, or let's say the mid 1990s, where I studied multiphasic growth development in layer pullets. And at that time, we had far less vaccinations than we have nowadays. But what we found was that a basic body development, and that was the first arrow that you see there, which means that the gastrointestinal tract is developing, the muscles for legs, wings, etc., are developing, and that all is happening without any extra excess of fat accretion. If that basic body development, which is a very allometric way of developing the bird, if that's going well, then that's the initiator of the so-called pubertal growth spurt. And when that is happening, and underneath the pubertal growth spurt, there's around 70% of ovary and oviduct growth underneath that pubertal growth spurt. You can read it all in my thesis. Be aware, everybody, even without the university, can find all the PhD theses of people from our university. You can download that whenever you would like to do that. And in fact, if a bird is starting the pubertal growth spurt, then it's also initiating 15 days later, more or less, with onset of lay. So there was in my studies, there was a direct relationship between the pubertal growth spurt and the onset of labor, which we defined that as 50% production. So halfway the increasing production curve. So this is still the model that is being used by many breeding companies in order to in their management guides to tell the people that are buying their layers that they should really focus on a very well body development during the first 15 weeks of age of this of a young layer, so to say, of a premature layer. So it is a basic body development. Well, I say here up to 10 weeks of age. You could also say up to 10 to 15 weeks of age, depending a little bit. What you see a lot in the basic body development is that it occurs allometrically. And what does that mean? An allometric growth means that the different components in the body, they have of course a different pace. They have of course a different speed in developing, but they do that more or less in the same ratio to each other. So it's not that if protein is being accrued in the bird, that the fat is even being faster. No, the relationship between protein, fat, and water is in a young layer bird exactly the same. It's not different from one, so to say. So the bird cannot be too much fattened, so to say, during that time. And then if this basic body is matured, then you will see that the pubertal growth. So that means that the bird is becoming sexual mature, so to say. This is what I already said. And for a farmer, it means that they should weigh the birds frequently, because we are not interested in a chronological age in your flock, but we are interested in a physiological age of your flock. So whenever the birds are being retarded a little bit, then you need to take that into account, and not saying, okay, but wait a minute, the bird is already 6 weeks old, so I have to change over to another diet. No, check the weight of the bird, and on the basis of that, you might change it to another diet, to maybe a less dense diet in that way. If we are talking about young birds in more loose housing systems, this is a little bit an open field still. I call it here bone development in loose housing systems. And what you see is that a coarse mesh increases bone ash and phosphorus and calcium retention in broilers. We do not know yet whether that is also the situation in layers, in young layers. We are doing some experiments in that area, but we would like to know a little bit more. What? Somebody is not keeping. There it is. Yes. The fact is that we do not know exactly what is happening over there, but we know for sure that if we are having a wet feeding strategy, that it will also it can also break down the phytate potentially by microbial fermentation at that moment. I will tell a little bit more about that later. And what we see sometimes is that a low, and I'll show you that in a minute, that the low phosphorus availability is not always bad if you are feeding the bird a coarse or a wet diet. But as I said already, there's not a lot known about this. And sometimes you really have to go to the broiler data and then try to to compare that to what might happen in layers. But the layer is, of course, another bird, because they need to build up their bone development. They need to build up their medullary bone for egg production later on. So that's a whole other story in that way. You cannot easily put those data over to layers, so to say. So I'll show you some little results where we investigated the effect of coarse or wet diet on phosphorus utilization in wide layers around transition. So from, let's say, 15 weeks of age to 23 weeks of age. And we checked what the birds could do with a diet which was adequate or a little bit low in pre-cecal digestible phosphorus. And let's see what it brought. So this is it was a 2x2x2 vectorial design with two phosphorus levels, dry versus wet diet. And wet means actually that we were wettening the diet in a 1-to-1 ratio. So 50% phosphorus levels. So 50% moisture in the wet diet, so to say. And we changed fine versus coarse diet. So with a roller mill or we had a mash. Well, here you see a few other different, well, let's say basic parts in our experiment. This is one slide, and I'll just put directly the boxes around it. What you see here is that whenever you are feeding a wet diet, that the bird from 19 to 22 weeks of age is eating more. And that is already one advantage, because the birds do have problems prior to their first egg to have a larger feed intake. And what you see here is that whenever you are feeding them a wet diet, that their feed intake, and of course this is always dry matter feed intake. So it's corrected for the amount of water that we included in the wet diet, of course. So this is always dry matter feed intake, so to say. You see that it is in both situations, whether it is a higher or a lower available phosphorus diet, it was in both situations increased. Egg mass is also thereby increased. So here you see the direct relationship between feed intake and egg mass production. But you see that the available phosphorus diet have a little bit lower data in that way. And that was particularly in this period the situation, although there were all significances, but no interactions in this way. And there were also no difference in FCR in that way. Here you see it from 23 to 27 weeks of age. And what you see here is that, again, here you see the same data in terms of feed intake, but also egg mass is a little bit higher, particularly if you're talking about the wet diet and the low available phosphorus level. And therefore you see that there is an interaction occurring, both for feed intake as well as for egg mass production. Here, that's the interaction, P times N. But finally, what we found that coarseness, fine diet or coarse diet, also showed that with a moderate available phosphorus diet, that with a wet diet, we had basically a higher egg mass production during the period that the birds were producing an egg. So here you see that, again, wettening the diet is a very good way in order to increase feed intake and thereby also increase egg mass production. Here you see it. There were no effects on eggshell and tibia breaking strength in this experiment. Well, if we're talking about feather pecking behavior, and you might know that one of my very good colleagues, Marinus van Krimpen, the guy that I am referring here to. He did a PhD with me a couple of years ago, but he passed away suddenly 2 years ago, just prior to the COVID situations. And so that's still a big loss for us. But what he did is he made a whole study in layers on feather packing behavior. We are now continuing that study by checking in young birds whether there is a critical period. One of my current PhD students, Anne-Marie, is doing that. And we already found in the first experiment that the main critical period for, let's say, misbehavior in young layers is happening during the first, well, let's say 2, 3, 4 weeks. So in the very early period of their life. So from 0 to 5 weeks of age. What you see, by the way, nowadays is that particularly in white birds, there's not only feather packing happening, but there's also a lot of toe packing. And probably you have heard that as well. If you change, and some countries have to change nowadays within Europe to non-beak trimmed birds, like we have in the Netherlands, then you see that birds start to toe pack to each other instead of feather packing. So it's sometimes it is awful that you think you might work well in the right direction for feather packing behavior, but then there is another misbehavioral issue that is coming up. In fact, what you most of the time see, that if eating time is increased for the birds, and they have a lot of litter material, or they have a lot of bales hanging in the scratching area, whatever, and they feel quite tired, then there is less risk for a feather packing outbreak in layers in that way. But we think that there is basically quite a nice relationship with what is happening in the rearing period. That will have then its effect on the layer period, and that is exactly where the current study is about. And as you can see down in this blue box, that we are not only checking what is happening in terms of nutrition, but we're also checking behavioral, neuroendocrine, and metabolic parameters, and see in which period the bird is quite sensitive. And on the basis of the behavioral outcome, we know those data already. We see that the sensitivity, the most sensitive period seems to be prior to 5 weeks of age of the young bird, so to say. Well, here you see a couple of those data from Marines from a later stage, that whenever you are feeding, let's say more diluted diets, then the biggest effect of non-dilution is in the laying period, and that is of course what we also saw. And there you see that it can go totally wrong in that way if you are non-diluting the diet, and the bird can easily compensate for the energy intake. That's no problem at all. Here you see, and this is one from one of my PhD students a couple of years ago, Shafkat Kwasrani, and he shows here that if you increase eating time, and you could increase that in percentages within a pan or individual birds or whatever, then you see that the feather damage is decreasing. So the feather damage score is going down. So whenever you let the birds eat or scavenge or whatever, then you see that feather packing behavior is becoming less. That is another one. And this is another one. If you have a higher insoluble NSP intake, then you see that after a slow start, you see a real high increase up to a gizzard weight of the birds. But that's a very well-known aspect, and I will tell a little bit more about that when we are talking about coarser diets in the next presentation. And here you see the other way around, which is quite logical, of course. If you have lower insoluble NSP levels in your diet, then you see that feather damage is becoming a higher risk in young pullets, so to say. Well, then finally, I'll show you a couple of little slides from 3 PhD students from Dr. Gonzalo Mateos from Spain. And he had a couple of students a couple of years ago, and they were doing studies on pullets. And actually, I found it quite nice to see that at least one research group was working with layer pullets, and therefore I thought, well, I definitely have to quote them what they found, and particularly look towards the data you might see at another moment, but at least it is quite nice to see what, for example, Mohammed Frika, what he mentioned. He said, we hypothesized that growth development of the pullets in the first weeks of age would be enhanced on the fine pellet. And that is of course true, because we all know that whenever you're having a coarser mesh in the first weeks of age, that you definitely would have selection for the larger particles, which are most of the time the carbohydrate fraction in the diet, and that would mean that they might grow a little bit slower. But, and that's also what he was saying, thereafter, you should aim for a good gizzard development to promote feed intake. Most of the time we call a better gizzard development, or we call the gizzard basically the pacemaker of the gastrointestinal tract. And whenever you have a good developed gizzard, and I will show you that in some figures in the next presentation, then it means that you have more refluxing properties in the GI tract. And for a bird, refluxing in the GI tract is dramatically important, because therefore you are increasing transit time, and by increasing, I should say, by increasing retention time, so slowing down passage rate, that means that the bird can get more out of that diet than when it is just flushing through the gastrointestinal tract. Beatriz Saldana, when I gave this presentation a couple of years ago in Spain, it was nice that those PhD students were in the audience. So they liked that I was quoting their studies, so to say. Pullets that changed from crumble to mesh, and I'm just telling you what is in the blue box, and then later you could check the different data from the little table that I show you over there. But whenever you change from crumble to mesh at 5 or 10 weeks of age, the bird is directly responding to it by a decrease in average daily gain and an increase in gizzard weight. So you see that, and that's the nice thing of young pullets. They will directly react on a change in feed form, so to say. And that's also what currently Trouw Nutrition is doing a couple of those trials at this moment also in Spain, actually, not here, but at another spot. And young pullets appear to have less ability to increase voluntary feed intake when a low, bulky diet is being fed in mesh form. So we should be aware that particularly at very young ages, we should feed the bird in such a way that all the nutrients are being absorbed, and that the bird is gaining weight quite quickly. That it has again to do with the basic body development that I showed a couple of slides ago. And the last one that I show you is from Pilar Guzman, the guy, and he was feeding straw in 2 different percentages. You can do it a little bit too much, as you can see on these data. But he suggested that whenever you are using around 2% of insoluble fiber, straw in this situation, you could improve GIT development and maximize growth of the birds in that way. So these are quite nice little studies in which you see that the bird is directly reacting on NSPs, on straw, on different feed forms, etc. Whenever you change from one diet to another diet. Well, when I come to my final conclusions, and even particularly if we are talking about, in fact, 100 weeks of production, you should be aware that we all would like to have a high feed intake at young ages prior to transition to the rearing period. We should promote a proper gut development, and we should feed them coarser diets. I made a statement like keep the rearing hens busy. So they should have a long time in order not to develop misbehavior in that way, and provide feed according to physiological ages. That is what I promoted, and sustain a proper rearing during the laying period, whenever that is necessary. That is not always easy for an individual farmer, of course. Well, this was a little overview of pullet nutrition, and as you see, you cannot do a lot wrong, but you really have to look very carefully to your flock. What are they doing? How are they behaving? What is their feed intake? Do they develop in the proper way? We know a little bit about when different organ systems are being developed within the bird. So we know by this multiphasic growth development when we need to have a higher feed intake and when we need to have a lower feed intake. So that's the best way in order to get the bird in a good condition. And now, Dr. Irfan, I have no idea how long I have been talking. Oh, now, 41 minutes. So that's quite within time.
Yes, okay. You use about 42 minutes, yeah, more or less, yeah.
Oh, 42
so
minutes.
I think
okay.
we will have more time for discussion, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I see that there are already 73 participants. That's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very interesting topic, I think, from you, Dr. Rene. Yeah, so maybe more student interest and join with us. Yeah. Okay, now we open the question hours. Yeah, question and answer.
Perfect.
Maybe you can directly speak up in the Zoom. Yeah. Who want first? Yeah. Siapa yang mau bertanya, monggo, silakan. Who want to have question? It's already open the microphone, Pak Eko Widodo.
Yes. May I?
Please, Pak Eko.
Thank you very much. Very interesting.
Okay.
Presentation from Professor Kwakkel from Wageningen University. Well, because I have moved from one room to another due to there is a meeting, so I missed some of your presentation. But I wonder whether I could ask, with regard to your explanation on insoluble non-starch polysaccharides. Insoluble non-starch polysaccharide. Could you explain once more with regard to the role of insoluble, not soluble, but insoluble non-starch polysaccharide in your previous presentation?
Yeah, so your basic question is what the effect might be if you are feeding certain levels of insoluble fiber. Is that your question?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, the point is always that there is a kind of a balance in that, because if you would feed too much insoluble fiber, then you are decreasing the density of your diet, and that is of course for pullets that do not have a large feed intake during their younger ages might be detrimental. However, on the other hand, what we also would like to see is that whenever we are feeding a too fine diet, and I will tell a little bit about that in the next presentation, if we are feeding a too fine diet, that would mean that we are not stimulating the gastrointestinal tract and that the retention time is too low, is too short actually. So the passage rate is too high in the gastrointestinal tract. And if the passage rate is too high, that means for sure that the bird will not get all of the nutrients out of the diet. I mean, you can imagine that a bird in such, and poultry are birds, that a bird has a relatively short gastrointestinal tract. Because if they would have a larger gastrointestinal tract, they would not be able to fly. And therefore they need the property of refluxing. So the gastrointestinal content should go back and forward, constantly back and forward at several spots in the gastrointestinal tract. And I'll show you later a very nice picture about that. That was being researched by a biologist, Mr. Duke, a couple of years ago, and he did dramatically nice work in that way. And now, yeah, I see here, but this is in Bahasa Indonesia, so this is, I cannot read that, unfortunately. But
Okay, thank you.
yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, Dr. Rene, about the insoluble fiber, yeah, we continuing the question about the fiber. Do you have some explanation about the relation between insoluble fiber to the digestion or to the absorption of the nutrient beside the gizzard, wake, for example? Yeah, do you have any information?
Well, what you see, we do not know all the details about particularly that is quite nice.
Yeah.
One of our PhD students now, which is an Indonesian student, he is really investigating all different aspects of insoluble fiber, soluble fiber, and what does it do in the gastrointestinal tract. In his case, he is working with broilers, but he also did a study with layers. So we do not know yet everything, but what you see is that nowadays in the feed mill industry, particularly here in Western Europe, feed millers are constantly using a certain small percentage of oat hulls. Well, oat hulls is mainly insoluble fiber. And they just do that in order to be able to, how would you say that, to stimulate the gastrointestinal contractions in the bird. And that is, and then of course there you could think about, should it be round particles, larger particles, should it be spheric particles? And actually we do not know yet how that is actually working.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, student.
Yeah, students, right.
Please. Okay, I will, yeah, Dimas, please, Dimas. Okay, Dimas, you have a question, please, directly to Dr. Rene. Dimas.
My name is Dimas. I have a question. The ovary is the organ most concerned with egg production in pullet hens. I read it out. What are the things that need to be considered to maintain the health of the ovaries so that they can produce eggs optimally? Oh, that is a good question, but also a difficult one. Well, in fact, the development of the ovary is starting at a certain moment, and then the number of ovums is quite large. So that is not a real issue. Where we are most concerned with is that there is constantly an ovulation going on, and what we need to be aware of is that the bird need to produce then a whole egg finally. So that means that the whole system of getting the albumin pasted around the ovum on the one hand, and then the eggshell pasted around the albumin. That is the main critical thing in egg production. I mean, we all know that birds can lay eggs for years, but the problem is all the time that finally the whole system of releasing and mobilization of calcium and phosphorus, that's the critical point, and then they start to lay well, let's say lower quality egg shell quality eggs basically, and that is the most of the problem.
Okay, Dr.
But
Rene.
I think that basically the health of the ovaries as such is not a big of a problem.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Dr. Rene, one of my students want to ask you, but he have a problem with the microphone. Yeah, there is a trouble.
Yeah.
So I will directly ask to you what my student asked. Yeah, is asking about the dry and wet feed.
Yeah.
Yeah, because from your presentation, the effect of the wet feed, have a better performance compared with the dry. How they can do? They practically they feed the animal with the wet food.
Yeah, that is a good one. Of course, we did it up to now, both with broilers and layers in a kind of a laboratory setting, because we do those trials in our research facility, and then the students need to do a lot of work because they have to change the diet 2 times a day. So that's a lot of work. But actually, currently, we are working with feed mill industries and with technicians to develop a system where you can where you can mix the water and the diet, but you can also say where you can provide an ingredient from the food industry that is not yet dried. I'll give you an example. We are currently doing a lot of research on the beer byproducts. So the product that is coming from the beer industry, which is a wet product, and the birds are very keen on it. But even if you would just soak it and just say, okay, we have a 50% dry matter content, then there is also a possibility to make that on basically on barn. Now, actually on barn level. You should try to prevent that you have in all of the change and all of the tubes within the barn. You should not have already a mixture, a porridge type of diet, because then you get some contamination. You might not clean it, so you have to mix it basically very close to the bird. We are starting now an engineer's degree with a student that is working for the coming 2 years on a device to implement this, because if you have quite high effects on feed conversion ratio, then I think that the industry will quite quickly take over this type of things. And it is also quite nice. I mean, no, I don't mean nice, but what I mean is that it's also quite logic that you see that birds are. I mean, if you have a bird in an outside world, they will never eat a 98% dry diet. And that's actually what we did. We fed them a totally dry diet, which is quite ridiculous, because if a bird is scavenging around, whether it is here in the Netherlands or in Indonesia, the ground is wet, has a little bit moisture, kernels are already germinating, whatever. So it's never totally dry.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I think for the wet feed, it's easier to consume by the bird. Is that point?
It is.
Yeah. So I think they will have more better effect, to the FGR or other performance for the bird.
Well, in fact, the student that I mentioned before the presentation, Shawan, he did also in Indonesia experiments with wet feeding for the indigenous bird, the ayam, whatever, and then another. I do not know the name exactly, but yeah, exactly, kampong chicken.
Ayam kampung, native chicken.
And he saw also because particularly if you have also a quite humid and warm environment, then it might help if you give the bird not a dry diet, but a little bit humid or liquid diet, you could say.
Okay.
And
okay. Thank you, Dr. Rene. I have a question about the layer. In the first beginning of the life. I think it's quite a very critical period. During his life, because in the first maybe 1 month of their life is more focus on the development of the internal organ. I think I more focus right now I know better with the broiler. But I don't know how for the layer. Until how all the layer develop the internal organ.
Well, they do that at least up to 6-7 weeks of age. So that
6-7 weeks.
Yeah. Okay. So of course it's going slower than in the broiler. But what we did in the past is sometimes to restrict also the layer, Pullet a little bit, but you should never restrict them prior to, let's say, week 10 or something like that. So you definitely should feed them with quite relatively high levels of amino acids. But then you could easily follow the breeder management guides. But at least it's very important not to restrict the bird in the first half of the rearing period, and check whether they have a proper feed intake in that way. And birds are eager, so whenever you can find a way in order to attract them to the feed trough, then they will definitely.
Yeah, there is a question from the student in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see.
Is the ovary is the most important organ, I think, for the pullet. What the development of the ovary? How can the nutrition need to maximize the ovary development?
Yeah, that was the question of Dimas, and we already spoke. We already spoke about that. We had that was the question two questions before this one. So we already had the discussion about particularly this question.
Okay. Yeah.
But I see that there are more students that would like to. That would be nice.
Oke, silakan. Ada yang mau bertanya lagi? student, silakan, please. If you have question, we still have time. Yeah.
Yeah. I see one new message. Wait a minute. Oh no, that's not. Well, whenever, and I think that is a good point, Irfan, whenever some of your students might have later questions also for me related to this presentation, they can always send me an email.
Okay.
That's no problem. You know my email address, so and they can find my easily.
Yes, okay.
And so that they always, if they think, well, we are digesting the presentation a little bit, and then they can always ask questions also later.
Okay.
And I would be very happy, because maybe that is something that I should also say now to most of the students. I'm program director of the Bachelor and Master program, also in Wageningen Animal Sciences. So we are very much happy whenever students would have, well, let's say the financial circumstances to join Wageningen University. But I see there is a name of Saskia. And there's the question of Saskia. Chicks are usually fed ad libitum. Is there any impact?
Saskia.
If that wait a minute. Is there any impact if they are overweight in the first month? They will never. They will never. That's the point. They are not going to be overweight in the first month. Basically not even in the second. Because that has to do with the fact that they are gaining in weight in an allometric situation. So they will not be overfed and gain a lot in extra fat development or fat accretion. That's not happening. So don't worry that a young pullet, we are talking about pullets, that the young pullet is being overfed. It's even better if you could try to get them. And now for the provision of minerals such as calcium and phosphorus, whether the day-old chick has been given or wait to enter the next phase like growers, then we can give them minerals.
Yeah, about calcium, phosphorus requirement.
Yeah, well, that's what I said in the beginning. There is for layers and for hens in transition still a lot to do. We do not know a lot about what we could do now. So we really have to wait until some more research has been done in this area. So now you only can go on with the how would you say that the availabilities that there are in the diet, but we actually this is a system that we are not able to say in any direction something. So that's a pity. So if it's a student T, if student T wants to do a good study, come over as an exchange student to Wageningen and try to do such type of a trial. That would be very, very nice.
Yeah. Is there any scholarship? Yeah, for Indonesian or ASEAN?
I know that it is called what is it? The NDAP scholarship, something like that.
NDAP.
There is a scholarship for Indonesian students.
Netherlands government?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the combination Netherlands, Indonesia.
Yeah.
From
the Indonesian government, we also available for LPDP. Yeah. It's for only for Indonesian student. Yeah. Maybe if there is any one or two student want to continue to Wageningen, maybe Dr. Rene can give him the recommendation or something like that.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Particularly the students that are posing good questions.
Yeah.
They can have the recommendations. Because I see that there is a question from Aulia. As you said before, there are less research about pullet feed rather than other layer periods or stays. What is the most challenging thing to do or to develop in increasing optimum pullet status based on its feed beside of the feed requirements? Well, what I think is the most important way that we need to find out how we could keep the feed intake capacity of the bird. And I think we should really focus then on how we can make the diet as desirable as possible, because that will definitely increase feed intake. And so the two things that I will mention in my second presentation are therefore very, very important. But let's see. And it seems, and then we are coming back to this oral sensing.
Okay.
What we, for example, found, and I'll show you that a little bit later, but we don't have a lot of data now, but the performance is really going up with 15% in our most recent study. If you are feeding birds with the beer byproduct, so to say. So you're not only diluting the diet with water, but you're including a beer byproduct as a liquid part in your diet, and therefore you get a whole liquid diet, of course. And then you see that in terms of feed intake, the birds are increasing dramatically. But it is a little bit, it's a tiny balance, because it should not dry in, because if it's becoming dry in the barn, then the bird will not eat it anymore. So you have to be very careful in manufacturing those type of diets. That's not an easy thing.
Dr. Rene, about the body weight of the layer during the pullet, what I told to my student, mostly we have to restrict it, we have to apply restricted feeding, after the pullet with the 10 weeks old, because after 10 weeks, weekly we doing the weighing, to make sure that the body weight is more uniform. Uniformity of the body weight is very important for the layer after 10 weeks old. It is what do you comment about that?
Well, it is always a little bit tricky, because whenever you say after 10 weeks of age, we are going to restrict the birds, that means that you are not stimulating them in feed intake, in their feed intake capacity. And you could even say that, okay, if we restrict the birds, let's say to 85% of ad libitum feed intake, then the one bird could be coping far better with 85% of restriction, or with 15% restriction, than another bird. So still you can have that whenever feed efficiency is in one bird better than in the other, that you still have not a very uniform flock. So it is not by definition that you definitely get a good flock. And whenever you would like to have that, then you really need to weigh a lot of those birds and see how it is arranged. But that is a very difficult part. It is true that after 10 weeks of age, the bird might start to increase fat deposition. That is true. So a little bit restriction might be okay, but be always aware that the birds might be metabolically different, reacting on a shorter feed intake.
Okay.
And if you do that, if you decrease the increase or the increments every week in feed intake, in grams of feed intake. If you decrease those increments a little bit by slowing down their growth rate, then you should, after 15 weeks of age,
15?
increase again feed intake.
Okay.
So then you could decrease it a little bit between 10 and 15 weeks of age, and then increase it again to stimulate feed intake. 15, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, but we have a different experience with the layer coil. Yeah. Last month, I have a research about the layer coil. Yeah, if I have applied the restricted feeding, they will be laying egg late. Yeah, mostly they start laying 42 or 43 days.
Yeah,
but if I apply the restricted feeding, they will be late, until 50 days, until it's all. It's in the coil, not in the
no, right, yeah, but then probably the point is then the body weight threshold has not been reached then at the moment that that for example light is going to stimulate egg production. So in that way, probably the body weight development was still not there. And what we did in our trials is that this basic body development was very important, but in fact the target weights, if you have more or less fat at the moment that the bird is around 18, 19 weeks of age, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. The bird is totally dependent on the fat-free body mass, so to say, on the body mass that is mainly ash, protein, and water. That is the determinant for starting egg production. And I did not only see that in my layers, but nowadays we see that as well in one of the studies with the broiler breeders. We see it exactly the same. That protein is more determined than fat in terms of starting production. So I can imagine that it is also for quail the situation.
Yeah, for quail.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Rene. I think it's the end of the first session. Yeah, I think we still take a 5 or 10 minute break, for toilet or for drink.
Perfect.
I think we have a 10 minute for break. And then we come back for the next session.
We do.
Okay, terima kasih, thank you. Untuk mahasiswa student, we have a 10 minute break. Kita punya 10 menit untuk istirahat, untuk ke toilet atau ke minum misalnya, sehingga kita nanti we will back at 10:20 jadi kita akan kembali nanti jam 10 lebih 20 menit. Sekarang kita break dulu. Oke, terima kasih.